Welcome to Miss Scarlett. Subscribe and don't miss out on Patreon. Have fun! As the sun began its slow descent, casting a warm amber glow across the basketball court, Jonathan Miller's once confident demeanor took a blow as powerful as any slam dunk. He stood tall at 6 feet, his broad shoulders now sagging under the weight of his team's defeat, a rare occurrence for the athletic prodigy. It was just a friendly bet over a basketball game, or so Jonathan thought.
"You knew the stakes, mate,"
Marcus ribbed him, his gray-blue eyes twinkling with mischief as he spoke.
"Besides, it's your 21st birthday in a couple of days. What better way to celebrate than with a little friendly challenge?"
Sighing, Jonathan raked a hand through his tousled brown hair.
"You know I'm not one for wild dares, especially after a loss like this." "You agreed to the terms."
The terms. A complete makeover for his 22nd birthday. Not just any makeover, a feminization makeover. The thought made Jonathan's stomach tighten with anxiety. He'd never even considered how he might look dressed as a woman. It was meant to be humiliating, a joke at his expense that they could laugh about for years to come.
"Fine,"
he finally conceded, knowing there was no escaping it.
"But just for one night, and no pictures."
His roommates exchanged glances that told him they had no intention of honoring that last request. Saturday arrived too quickly. Jonathan sat nervously on the edge of his bed, wearing nothing but boxers and a tank top, as his 3 roommates bustled around gathering supplies they'd borrowed from female friends.
"Hold still,"
Marcus instructed, wielding an eyebrow pencil with surprising expertise.
"And close your eyes."
For the next 2 hours, Jonathan endured the transformation process. They shaved his legs and arms, applied foundation to hide his stubble, contoured his face to soften his features, and even glued on false eyelashes that felt impossibly heavy on his lids.
"You've got good bone structure,"
Damon remarked, tilting Jonathan's chin up to examine his handiwork.
"Lucky for you. Where did you guys even learn to do this?"
Jonathan mumbled, trying not to move his lips too much, as Marcus applied a glossy red lipstick.
"My sister's a makeup artist,"
Marcus explained.
"I've watched her work enough times."
"And I dated a drag queen last summer," Damon added with a wink. When they finally allowed him to look in the mirror, Jonathan felt his breath catch in his throat. The stranger staring back at him had high cheekbones, accentuated with a rosy blush, smoky eyes that made his hazel irises pop, and full, red lips. His brown hair had been styled with temporary extensions, transforming his shortcut into shoulder-length waves with subtle auburn highlights catching the light.
"Auburn looks good on you,"
Marcus commented, adjusting one of the extensions.
"Really brings out your eyes."
"Now for the outfit," Connor, his 3rd roommate, announced, pulling items from a shopping bag with dramatic flair. They dressed him in a tight black pencil skirt that hugged curves he didn't know he could have, a crisp white blouse that cinched at his waist, and red pumps that matched his lipstick. The final touch was a padded bra beneath the blouse, creating the illusion of a modest chest.
"We need a name for you,"
Damon decided, circling Jonathan like a fashion critic.
"You can't go out as Jonathan tonight." "Isabelle,"
Connor suggested immediately.
"She looks like an Isabelle."
Jonathan opened his mouth to protest, but stopped. There was something about the name that resonated. Isabelle. It felt right in a way he couldn't explain.
"Fine,"
he agreed with a sigh.
"Isabelle for tonight."
The club they chose was across town, a trendy spot where they were unlikely to run into anyone from campus. As they approached the entrance, Jonathan, now Isabelle, wobbled slightly on the unfamiliar heels.
"Easy there,"
Marcus said, taking her elbow to steady her.
Small steps, heel to toe.
The bouncer barely glanced at their IDs before waving them inside. The pulsing music enveloped Isabelle as she crossed the threshold, the bass thrumming through her body. Colored lights flashed across the packed dance floor, and the scent of perfume and sweat hung in the air.
I'll get us drinks,
Connor shouted over the music, disappearing into the crowd. Isabelle stood awkwardly at the edge of the dance floor, intensely aware of how the skirt restricted her movements and how the bra straps dug into her shoulders. Yet, beneath the discomfort was a strange sense of rightness that she couldn't ignore.
Your friends abandoned you?
A voice asked. Isabelle turned to find a tall man with dark hair smiling down at her. Her first instinct was panic. Would he be able to tell? Would he react badly if he did? They went to get drinks, she replied, pitching her voice higher than normal.
I'm Carlos,
the man said, extending his hand.
Isabelle.
The name slipped out naturally, as if she'd been using it her whole life. Carlos's hand was warm as it enveloped hers.
Would you like to dance while you wait for them?
Before she could answer, a familiar voice cut in.
She's with us!
Marcus appeared at her side, handing her a colorful cocktail. Carlos raised his hands in surrender.
Just asking for a dance, man. No harm meant.
As he walked away, Isabelle felt an unexpected pang of disappointment.
You okay?
Marcus asked, studying her face.
We can leave if you're uncomfortable.
No, Isabelle replied quickly. I'm fine. It's just different. Different good or different bad? She took a sip of her drink, considering the question. Just different. As the night progressed, Isabelle found herself relaxing. The initial stiffness in her movements gave way to a fluid grace as she became accustomed to the heels and the skirt. When they finally hit the dance floor, she discovered a freedom in the way the fabric swirled around her legs, in the way her longer hair brushed against her shoulders as she moved.
You're really getting into this,
Connor observed during a break from dancing. Isabelle shrugged, but couldn't deny it. There was something exhilarating about being seen as a woman, about the way men's eyes lingered on her as she passed, about the camaraderie she felt when a group of women complimented her outfit in the bathroom. By the time they left the club at 2 a.m, Isabelle was buzzing with a revelation she wasn't ready to voice. The cool night air kissed her flushed cheeks as they walked back to Damon's car.
So, birthday boy, or should I say birthday girl, what's the verdict?
Marcus asked as they drove back to campus.
Worst bet loss ever?
Isabelle gazed out the window, watching the city lights blur past. It wasn't what I expected, she admitted.
You were a natural,
Connor said from the front seat.
Even I was convinced.
The word convinced lingered in Isabelle's mind, because for a few hours, she herself had been convinced. Not that she was successfully pretending to be a woman, but that she was finally expressing something that had been buried deep inside her all along. Back in their dorm room, she carefully removed the makeup with the wipes Marcus provided, peeled off the false eyelashes, and changed back into basketball shorts and a t-shirt. But even as Jonathan returned to his usual appearance, Isabelle remained, a presence just beneath the surface that couldn't be wiped away. His roommates treated the whole event as a hilarious prank successfully executed, laughing as they scrolled through the photos they'd taken despite his earlier protests. Jonathan laughed along, but his thoughts were elsewhere, replaying moments from the night, the feel of the silky blouse against his skin, the weight of the longer hair, the strange completeness he'd felt. In the days that followed, Jonathan found himself thinking about Isabelle constantly. He caught himself studying women on campus, not with romantic interest, but with an analytical eye, noting how they walked, spoke, gestured. He found himself lingering in front of mirrors, wondering what slight changes might bring Isabelle back to the surface. 2 weeks after his birthday, when his roommates were all in class, Jonathan found himself sitting on his bed with his laptop, searching terms he'd never dared to explore before: gender dysphoria, transgender, transitioning. Hours later, when Marcus returned from his final class of the day, he found Jonathan still sitting there, eyes red-rimmed.
Hey, you okay?
Marcus asked, dropping his backpack by the door. Jonathan looked up, vulnerability etched across his features.
I need to talk to you about something.
The conversation that followed was the most honest one Jonathan had ever had. He stumbled over his words, trying to articulate feelings he was only beginning to understand himself.
That night, being Isabelle, it didn't feel like a joke to me.
He finally managed to say.
It felt like I was seeing myself clearly for the first time.
Marcus listened without interruption, his initial confusion giving way to understanding.
So, what are you thinking?
He asked, when Jonathan finally fell silent.
I don't know yet,
Jonathan admitted.
I need time to figure this out.
But I think Isabelle might be more than just a one-night thing. Over the next few months, Jonathan began exploring his identity in small, private ways. He ordered feminine clothes online, wearing them only in the safety of his room when his roommates were out. He watched countless makeup tutorials, practicing with supplies he kept hidden in a shoebox under his bed. He began growing his hair out, claiming he was just trying a new style when anyone asked. His roommates, to his surprise, became his strongest supporters. They covered for him when needed, offered advice when asked, and most importantly, never treated his journey as another joke or bet gone too far. By the end of the semester, Jonathan had begun seeing a therapist who specialized in gender identity issues. The sessions helped him articulate what he had been feeling all his life without having the words to express it.
I've always felt like I was playing a role,
he explained during one session.
Being Jonathan was like wearing a costume that never quite fit right.
The therapist nodded. And when you're Isabelle? It feels like I can finally breathe, like I've been underwater my whole life and suddenly broke through to the surface. The decision to begin transitioning came gradually, a series of small choices rather than one dramatic moment. First came the hormone therapy, subtle changes that nobody else would notice, but that made Jonathan feel more aligned with the person he knew himself to be. Then came the more visible changes. He began dressing as Isabelle more frequently, first just in private settings with trusted friends, then for brief outings to places where he wouldn't encounter anyone he knew. His natural brown hair grew longer, and with the help of subtle treatments, took on a rich auburn hue that caught the light beautifully. The color was a deliberate choice, a callback to that first night when Marcus had casually mentioned how well it suited him. The auburn really brings out the warmth in your eyes, the stylist commented the first time she colored it professionally. Isabelle couldn't help but smile, remembering Marcus saying almost the same thing months ago. Coming out to his parents was the hardest part. They had always been supportive in a general sense, but this was testing the limits of that support. "We just don't understand," his mother said, tears in her eyes. "You never showed any signs." "The signs were there," Isabelle explained gently. "I just got very good at hiding them. I was hiding them from myself, too, for a long time." It took them time, months of difficult conversations, family therapy sessions, and gradual exposure to Isabelle as their daughter rather than their son. But eventually, they came around.
You seem happier,
his father observed over dinner, 6 months after Isabelle had first told them.
More yourself.
I am, she replied simply. A year after the fateful bet, Isabelle legally changed her name. Her roommates took her out to celebrate, back to the same club where she had first emerged.
To Isabelle,
Marcus toasted, raising his glass.
Who won the best bet ever?
She laughed, clinking her glass against his. I'm not sure losing a bet is supposed to change your life.
Best loss ever, then,
Connor amended with a grin. This time, when Isabelle stepped onto the dance floor in her black dress and red heels, there was no hesitation in her movements. Her auburn hair, now naturally falling past her shoulders, swung as she danced. The woman reflected in the club's mirrored walls was no longer a costume or a bet. She was simply Isabelle, finally living as her authentic self. After graduation, Isabelle moved to the city, where she found a job at a marketing firm that prided itself on its inclusive culture. Her transition continued, both medically and socially. The hormones softened her features, redistributed fat to create more feminine curves, and gave her skin a softer texture. Voice training helped her develop a natural-sounding feminine voice that no longer required conscious effort to maintain. Her apartment became a sanctuary, decorated in ways that Jonathan would never have considered, but that Isabelle found comforting and expressive. Soft throws draped over a plush couch, watercolor paintings hung on walls, painted a warm cream, and plants flourished on every available surface. It was a space that reflected her emerging self, thoughtful, nurturing, and unapologetically feminine. Dating was a new frontier, one that Isabelle approached cautiously. She was upfront about being transgender with potential partners, knowing that honesty was crucial but also aware that it made her vulnerable in ways she hadn't experienced before. There were rejections, some kind, and others cruel. There were fetishists who saw her only as an exotic experience rather than a complete person. But there were also genuine connections. Men who saw Isabelle for who she truly was and valued her for it. 3 years after her first night as Isabelle, she met Michael at a friend's gallery opening. He was tall with gentle eyes and a quiet confidence that immediately drew her in.
That painting reminds me of autumn in New England,
he commented, nodding towards a canvas swirling with reds and golds. The auburn tones are beautiful, Isabelle agreed, unconsciously touching her own hair of the same shade. They spent the rest of the evening in conversation, discovering shared interests in photography, hiking, and obscure sci-fi novels. When he asked for her number at the end of the night, Isabelle experienced a moment of familiar anxiety. Before I give you my number, she said carefully, there's something you should know. I'm transgender. Michael's expression remained unchanged.
Okay,
he replied.
I'd still like your number, if you're comfortable with that.
Their first date was coffee at a small cafe tucked away on a tree-lined street. Isabelle wore a green sweater that matched her eyes and dark jeans, her auburn hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She arrived early, her nervousness manifesting in the way she rearranged the sugar packets on the table.
Sorry I'm late,
Michael said, sliding into the seat across from her.
Got caught in a surprise meeting.
No problem, Isabelle replied, relieved that he had actually shown up. There had been first dates in the past where the other person never appeared, having reconsidered after researching her online, or simply losing their nerve. The conversation flowed easily, touching on their work, their families, their aspirations. Isabelle found herself relaxing, the initial nervousness giving way to genuine enjoyment of his company.
Can I ask you something?
Michael said as they were finishing their drinks. And feel free to tell me if it's too personal. Isabelle tensed slightly, bracing herself for the invasive questions that sometimes came at this point. Questions about surgery, about her body, about her real name.
When did you know,
he asked instead,
that the gender you were assigned at birth didn't match who you really were?
The question was thoughtful, focused on her experience rather than the logistics of her transition. Isabelle found herself opening up, sharing not just the story of the bet, but also the lifetime of subtle discomfort that had preceded it. The bet just gave me permission to try something I'd never let myself consider, she explained. It was like someone finally turning on a light in a room I'd been fumbling around in the dark. Michael nodded, listening intently.
Thank you for sharing that with me, he said when she finished. For what it's worth, I think you're incredibly brave.
Their relationship developed slowly, built on a foundation of mutual respect and growing affection. Isabelle introduced Michael to her friends, including her former roommates who had remained central figures in her life. In turn, he brought her into his world, introducing her to his family without preamble or explanation beyond, "This is Isabelle, the woman I've been telling you about." On their 1-year anniversary, Michael took her back to the gallery where they had first met. The same painting that had sparked their initial conversation was now wrapped in brown paper, waiting for her with a card attached.
To remind you of the beauty of transformation, the card read. Every autumn, the world changes its colors and becomes more vibrant, more itself, just like you.
Isabelle ran her fingers over the canvas, tracing the swirls of red and gold that had caught her eye a year before. "It's perfect," she whispered.
There's something else,
Michael said, reaching into his pocket.
I had this made for you.
The box he handed her contained a delicate gold pendant in the shape of a small leaf, inlaid with tiny stones in varying shades of amber and auburn.
To match your hair,
he explained as he fastened it around her neck.
The color that first caught my attention that night.
5 years after the bet that had changed everything, Isabelle stood in front of a mirror in a small room at the back of a garden venue. Her auburn hair had been styled in loose waves that cascaded down her back, adorned with small white flowers. The white dress she wore was elegant in its simplicity, with a modestly cut neckline and a flowing skirt that moved like water when she walked. A knock at the door broke her reverie.
Can we come in?
Marcus's voice called. Yes, come in, Isabelle replied, smoothing non-existent wrinkles from her dress. Her 3 former roommates entered, all dressed in matching charcoal suits with ties that matched the deep green of the bridesmaids' dresses.
Wow,
Damon breathed.
You look incredible. Seriously,
Connor agreed.
Michael is one lucky guy.
Marcus stepped forward, taking both of Isabelle's hands in his. I was just thinking about that night, after the basketball game, when I told you about the bet. If I had known what it would lead to, you'd still have made me do it, Isabelle finished for him with a laugh.
And I'm glad you did.
He smiled, acknowledging the truth of it.
Still, I never imagined we'd be here. Me as your man of honor, about to walk you down the aisle.
When her parents had struggled with the idea of her father giving her away at a traditional wedding, it had been Isabelle who suggested Marcus take on the role. After all, he had been there from the very beginning of her journey as Isabelle.
Ready?
He asked, offering his arm. Isabelle took one last look in the mirror at the woman she had become. The auburn-haired reflection smiled back at her, eyes bright with the confidence of someone who had found her way home after a long journey. Ready, she confirmed, taking his arm. The garden was in full bloom as they walked down the aisle, past rows of smiling friends and family. At the end stood Michael, handsome in his black suit, watching her approach with unabashed adoration. As Marcus placed her hand in Michael's, Isabelle felt a sense of completion that went beyond the ceremony itself. The bet that had been meant as a joke had set her on a path to discovering her true self, to building a life aligned with who she really was.
You look beautiful,
Michael whispered as they turned to face the officiant. Isabelle squeezed his hand, thinking not just of the dress or the carefully applied makeup, but of the journey that had brought her to this moment.
I feel beautiful,
she replied. I feel like me. The officiant smiled at them both before addressing the gathered guests.
We are here today to celebrate the union of Isabelle and Michael, two people who have found in each other a love that accepts, supports, and cherishes. Isabelle's journey to this day has been one of courage and authenticity, and Michael has proven himself a partner worthy of the trust she has placed in him.
As the ceremony continued, Isabelle felt a profound gratitude for the strange twist of fate that had begun with a lost basketball game and a birthday bet. What had been intended as a moment of embarrassment had instead become the first step toward a life of authenticity. When they exchanged vows, Isabelle's voice was clear and confident, no longer the artificially pitched tone she had adopted that first night at the club, but the natural voice she had developed through years of practice and hormone therapy. I promise to love you as my true self, she concluded, and to help you be yours. After the ceremony, at the reception held in a beautifully decorated barn adjacent to the garden, Isabelle and Michael shared their first dance as husband and wife. As they moved across the floor, Isabelle caught sight of her reflection in one of the large windows. The auburn-haired woman in the white dress no longer felt like a stranger or an alternate version of herself. She was simply Isabelle, in full bloom, like the garden outside, living the life she was meant to live. Later, as she danced with Marcus, he leaned in with a mischievous grin.
So, best bet ever?
Isabelle laughed, the sound ringing clear and true. Without a doubt, she agreed. The bet I lost that helped me win my life. As the evening wound down, Isabelle and Michael stood together at the edge of the dance floor, watching their friends and family celebrate.
Happy?
Michael asked, his arm around her waist. Isabelle thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, from Jonathan anxiously sitting on the edge of his bed as his roommates applied makeup, to Isabelle confidently walking down the aisle toward the man she loved. It had been a path filled with challenges, moments of doubt, and occasional heartbreak, but it had also been filled with discovery, joy, and a deepening sense of coming home to herself.
More than I ever thought possible,
she replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. The auburn hair that had become her signature feature caught the warm lights of the reception, gleaming like autumn leaves in sunshine. It was a constant reminder of that first night of transformation, a visual link between who she had been and who she had become. The bet had been just the beginning. The journey, the real journey, had been finding the courage to continue being Isabelle long after the makeup had been wiped away and the borrowed clothes returned. It had been about discovering that what had felt like a costume was actually her truest self, finally being allowed to emerge. As she and Michael left the reception amid a shower of flower petals, Isabelle carried with her not just the joy of the day, but the profound satisfaction of a life authentically lived. The bet had been lost, but in losing it, she had found herself. And that was a victory beyond measure.
Thanks for watching, my girlies! Be sure to check out Patreon for more!